Now, it's all kicking off in Ireland because a major working class protest is taking place right now in Dublin, sparked by what locals are calling mass uncontrolled immigration. It's set against the backdrop of arson attacks on all asylum seeker centres, soaring violence and even stabbings that have impacted local children and teachers. We're now joined by our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, who joins us live from the front line of the protest in Dublin. Dougie, we've been covering this story for many months here on GB News. I'm proud to say we're one of the only media outlets giving this the attention it deserves. There's been a huge array of social problems as a direct consequence of huge numbers of uncontrolled asylum seekers and immigrants coming into Ireland. Tell us about today's protest, what precipitated it and what's the mood on the ground?
Well, Martin, yes, you're quite correct. We're one of the only media covering this story from this side. And in fact, 18 months, 2 years ago when I first started, and it was in the East Wall side of stuff that things started getting unsettled, people were saying it was only inner city people, it was only working class people. Well, I can tell you today there is thousands of people here, and most of them are middle class working people who have marched to the front of the Dáil Éireann behind me here, the government buildings, to tell them that this is not acceptable and that they want change on illegal immigration. And joining me now is one of the men that actually started this journey along with us a couple of years ago, Malachy Stevenson. Malachy, I mean, what does today say to you?
Well, you know, when we started off in November 1922, or November 2022, sorry, I'm a bit behind. There was a few people, number of thousands, who eventually came out in East Wall to oppose what was happening in this country. Right around the country now, we have protest groups. Today, on a Thursday, when most people are in work, there's a protest of probably 2,500 people today. We have clearly put the immigration issue on the political agenda. Before we started protesting, you couldn't speak of immigration. They called us fascist, they called it racist, and indeed on the state broadcaster, which got bailed out this year to the tune of almost €1 billion, they have a hatchet piece on our protest movement. Not that they bothered to actually interview any of us when they were doing that. But you know, we have a government and we have a budget coming in here in 2 weeks, which will be the biggest giveaway budget that this country has ever seen, with the intention of buying the next election, which we expect to be in mid-November of this year. They think that they can buy people. They're spending €6 million a day on immigration. This is a huge industry, and like with most things, and you know from your own country, if you follow the money, you usually find the same people involved at the end of the chain. We have now almost every empty office block or warehouse being used to house people who are coming in from mainly the UK, having lived there for years and claiming asylum now in this country, because the welfare system is better, because the Minister for Integration said that within 6 months you would have the key to your own house. And the reality is, this country does not function. We received, through the European Court last week, 14 billion in a penalty against Apple in relation to some tax matters that this country had been involved in. That money will be spent, the bulk of it certainly will be spent on housing people who have no right to be in this country.
But there is an election coming up, and the problem that any anti-immigration party has is that you haven't been long enough on the ground, and therefore you will not be organised enough to make a real dent in any political settlement.
Well, of course, they said that before the local elections, and in Dublin City alone, or Dublin City and County, we have 5 or 6 elected councillors. Before last June, we didn't have any. We have a few more around the country, and we would expect to have up to half a dozen TDs in the next Parliament, and that would be a significant enough voice, because the numbers in the next election will be very tight, and we're looking at possibly a return of the same clowns who have destroyed this country after the next election, and it's up to people to come out and stop it. And I think we could hold the balance of power and bring real change. But people need to register, people need to get out and vote, and people need to get out and campaign for those who are opposed to the destruction of our country.
Well, there you go, Martin. Basically, they're getting ready for a general election. They've talked about the billions of pounds that came across from that European ruling that Irish government had to pay those taxes that they didn't take off Apple. But of course, loads of other American companies now will be very frightened that they might face the same thing, and they might well pull out of the Republic of Ireland. So all is to play for here in the next couple of months. We are really expecting a general election somewhere in and around the 15th of November. But from here today, at this point, it is amazing how many middle-class people, pensioners, etc., have now joined this protest.
And Doogie, before I let you go, just to give our viewers a scale of the issue. So it's about 400 asylum seekers every week are applying in Ireland now. 25,000 expected to apply this year, 50,000 since 2019, and all across set against a backdrop, Doogie Beattie, of a chronic housing shortage for local people. Social housing being simply hoovered up for the purpose of asylum seekers. So it's directly impacting the lives in a very measurable way of hard-working islanders.
That is exactly the point, Mark. You know, I mean, Irish people are very hard-working, very honest, and there's not a right wing in Ireland. I mean, it's the most liberal country in the world, and they have said, look, why when we asked for these office blocks, why when we asked, the Irish people asked for these old warehouses, why were they not converted to social housing? And as soon as this immigration problem starts coming in, and of course the framework document accelerated that quite substantially, because you now have two parts of Ireland that are both held inside EU regulation, but both in different jurisdictions, as in Northern Ireland is part of the UK, the Republic of Ireland is part of the EU in its totality, where Northern Ireland is only part of EU regulations. And this is really starting to push immigrants across the border into the Republic of Ireland, and they are being offered what the indigenous Irish people were not offered. And that is really what is at the bottom of what's happening here today.
OK, Doogie Beattie, an excellent start to the show. We'll be crossing live to you throughout the rest of the show. Get some more guests for us. We really want to give people a voice out there on the streets of Dublin. Thank you very much, Doogie Beattie there. Now, but apparently illegal immigration isn't as bad as we all think. Well, because new findings from the British Future and Ipsos have found that people think asylum seekers make up more than 30% of total immigration, when actually they make up around 7%. Well, our reporter Steve Edgington has a new documentary where he's been finding out the truth about immigration. Let's take a quick look.
Do you think there should be more immigration or less?
Less. You should stop it.
They're not putting all these people into hotels when we've got our own people struggling, living on the streets. It's absolutely disgraceful.
I've been homeless for a lot of years now. How you get treated as a British citizen, you know, someone in need. I've been in there crying, and I'd openly admitted, you know, that. And I have, pleading for help. You're not a priority.
Are you proud to be British?
Yeah, I'm ever so proud.
Are you proud to be British?
Used to be.
We have communities that are highly segregated, which are being reshaped along sectarian lines, and which are going through a pace of cultural demographic change that is completely reshaping the cultural norms. I mean, there are communities in England that basically don't look like England anymore, and I think that's where the loss of the familiar for many people becomes so existential.
Well, it's an excellent documentary, Immigration, the Truth, and its author, Steve Edgington, GB News reporter, joins me now. Steve, an excellent piece of work. Hats off to you. We're the People's Channel, giving a voice to ordinary people who feel forgotten, feel trampled upon. Tell us about your journey. Tell us about what you found.
Absolutely, Martin. Thank you very much. So we went across the country and we interviewed British people, immigrants, about their views towards this massive spike in immigration, both illegal and legal, that Britain has experienced in the last 20 years. We went to Leicester, the least white city in the country. Just 41% of people are white, according to the latest census data. And we asked locals what they thought about immigration and diversity and multiculturalism. Some of them said it had been a great success. We asked immigrants whether they felt proud to be British. Most of them said that they did. One of them bizarrely said she felt proud to be British because she gets free healthcare and free schooling for her children. On the other hand, native British people were telling us they no longer feel proud to be British, and many of them were highly critical of immigration, both as a threat from a cultural perspective, but also the pressure on schools, infrastructure, housing, and so on. We also went to Great Yarmouth, which is one of the only constituencies the Reform Party represents in Parliament, one of the poorest towns in the country. And we got some really interesting responses. You saw in that clip there, for example, from a homeless man who's outraged that he's not able to get a home from the taxpayers, whilst immigrants, illegal immigrants, are getting put up in luxury hotels in some cases.
Yeah, an excellent documentary, and the situation very much mirrored in Dublin, where we just crossed precisely the same situation. Did it strike you as depressing or emotional, perhaps inevitable, that particularly older Brits, Steve, are feeling their sense of national pride as just being eroded because they don't recognise the country they're in anymore?
Well, these people have grown up in a Britain that is very different to the Britain that they have got old in. You know, Britain used to be 99.9% white British, and the latest census data has put that number down to 74%, a drop from 87% in 2001. So this is an historic change in the people who live in this country. We have been, millions and millions of people from all around the world, from Africa, Asia, Europe, have come into Britain during their lifetimes, and they never asked for this. They voted against it at every single general election. There has never been democratic consent for our open borders policy. And there is a real level of anger out there, and I think a feeling of betrayal from many voters who see politicians making promises to cut immigration, and yet all they seem to do is ramp up the immigration numbers every year. So there's a real feeling of anger out in Britain.
Great stuff. It's a great piece of work, Steve Edgington, of course, and we'll get the QR code on the screen now. There it is. Immigration, the Truth. It's a GB News documentary by Stephen Edgington. You can watch it if you scan that QR code or go to the gbnews.com website /immigration. You'll find it there. Well worth a good bit of your time. Steve Edgington, thank you very much for joining us on the show today.